What's up, guys? Doomweek here, and welcome back to another episode of Watching the Meta, the weekly series where we take a look at all of the Magic Online tournaments, challenges, sometimes even showcases, sometimes even Modern Madness events. We'll get to that later. And we take a look at the metagame, and we see where the metagame is headed. We kind of compare it to what it was last week and see if there's any shifts or any trends happening. And for at least two of our formats, there seems to be some churn happening, but one of them, maybe not so much. Speaking of which, I am planning on recording a modern ban video prediction, what I think is going to happen, what I think should happen, how to fix the format. I'm going to try to record that tomorrow and get it up within the next couple of days. I do want to make something before the ban announcement, which is in 2 weeks, I think, the 16th of December. So be on the lookout for that. And if you are interested in hearing my thoughts on the modern format, you're not going to want to miss that one. This video is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com. Need some singles for that upcoming RCQ? Cool Stuff has got you covered. Be sure to use promo code DOOM at checkout for 5% off of your next order and this really awesome exclusive Doomwake Rhino token. Unfortunately, maybe not going to get so much use out of it nowadays without Crushing Footfalls in Modern, but it is still a really sweet token. Cool Stuff is also now offering full service selling. No sorting required. Take your collection, ship it over to Cool Stuff, no fees, fast payment. If you need cash fast for the holiday shopping season, Cool Stuff has got you covered. Send us your cards, we'll do the rest. But yeah, for people who are new to this series, like I said, we are going to get started with the modern formats. And it's not great. Look, we've been doing this for, a couple of months now, and basically if you went back to an episode from 3 weeks ago and just copy-pasted that graph, it would probably just look the exact same. Not really a lot to talk about here. Boros Energy, just completely dominant, taking up an absurd percentage of the format. Dimir Oculus following closely behind. I mean, that deck is pretty good. It got some new tools somewhat recently. I think I've seen some lists playing Kiora, but not a ton of them. Mono Blue Belcher, which was supposed to be the foil or the natural predator to Boros, looks like that necessarily has not quite panned out the way that everybody thought. Ruby Storm, Mardu Energy. The one thing that I will mention for this week specifically is there was a pretty big uptick in Brood Scale combo. And not just a big uptick in the percentages, a big uptick in the amount of wins, where the challenge is, okay, so I have 9 events that took place this weekend, 7 regular challenges, the Aspiring Spike Modern Madness event, and then as well as the Showcase Qualifier, which is like the highest echelon of MTGO events. Those events were won by Eldrazi-Tron, Mardu Energy, Grinding Breach, Blue-White Control, 2 Boros Energy, and 3 Brood Scale combo. So Brood Scale took down a third of the events this weekend, which is pretty significant for sure. That being said, this is the metagame from just in terms of the more popular decks, what people are playing, what's winning. But even though we are in Boros winter, there is still some new stuff to be found. And I'm going to start us off today with a Boros deck, but not the Boros deck you're thinking of. So I found this one from Pikachu Is My Companion, which, shout out, great username, by the way. Fantastic. Just love that username. And this is a similar take on an Aspiring Spike deck that he had played not too long ago. I want to say maybe like a couple of months ago. And it's called, 8 Blast, but in this case, we only have 7 Blast, 4 Galvanic, and 3 Shrapnel Blast. But it's a red artifact deck that is utilizing artifact synergies, right? So you mostly Voltaren Epicure, and specifically Urza Saga, because you have enough ways to make cheap artifacts between Epicure, Synthesizer, Mishra's Bauble. Those artifacts also turn on Galvanic Blast. They also give you good fodder for Shrapnel Blast, where, if you sacrifice a blood to a Shrapnel Blast, you don't feel like you're down a card because you still have the Epicure, you get the damage. And if you sacrifice Synthesizer, well, that replaces itself. So you have some ways to recur cards there. And now, most of the time, these decks are mono-red, but this one is actually choosing to splash Flage, which it's got Fear of Missing Out, it's got a nice Saga package here, it's actually kind of a Naya deck with Haywire Might. But yeah, if you are interested in playing Boros, but not that Boros deck, this could be a nice secondary option. Next up, I have for you from Mogged. You may recognize that username. In 22nd place, we have Sultai Goryo's Vengeance. So this is a really cool list that is utilizing Goryo's Vengeance alongside kind of your typical payoffs, right? Gristlebrand and Ulamog the Defiler. But there's also this secondary interesting angle where you get to utilize Grist plus Agatha's Soul Cauldron, where if you have some creatures in play, whether it be Delighted Halfling, Emperor of Bones, Cure of the Rising Tide, Psychic Frog, you have enough ways to have creatures to put counters on with Cauldron Grist to make sure you can keep churning through Grists. What's also nice is Emperor of Bones. So Emperor of Bones says whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on Emperor of Bones, do the thing. Put a creature card exiled with Emperor of Bones onto the battlefield. Now, the trick is, adapt you can only do once, but if you have ways to put counters on Emperor of Bones that are outside of adapt, then you can do it more than once. Namely, Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and also Psychic Frog, where, well, I guess you would need a frog under the cauldron, but if you have Frog Cauldron, you can then discard cards to the Emperor to put counters on stuff and keep going that way. So there's a lot of interesting synergies going on here that is all kind of tied together with Cauldron. You see new cards from Foundations, Kiora. There's also Cauldron plus Crystalbrand, which is kind of cool. So just a lot of different things that you can do with this deck, and I gotta say, this one looks pretty sweet, and if you are interested in playing some Gorios, this is a nice take on it. And last, but certainly not least, from Summon_Legend. Now, I will say, this is an aspiring Spike deck. Don't yell at me in the comments. And Spike has brewed up this deck, Magus of the Candelabra, to untap lands along with Overgrowth and Utopia Sprawl. So you can enchant your land, which makes it tap for more than 1 mana. You could then use the Magus to untap the land to make more mana to then get you to World Breakers, Myco Spawns, 4 Sire of 7 Death, which is a card that Eldrazi Tron decks have been picking up as of late too. We got a Karn package, we got rings because it's modern, and yeah, just an interesting take on the Tron deck. So that is going to do it for Modern, but let's go check in on Pioneer for a sec. Well, it's not so bad, is it? So after WotC removed Pioneer from the rotation for the RCQ formats, rest in peace, Pioneer, we will sorely miss you, the format has been really strange. Like, look at last week's graph compared to this week's graph. The format, it feels like there's just a new deck on top every single week. The numbers are just constantly shifting between what decks are showing up in the challenge top 32s, what's winning, so on and so forth. Like example, Demons, 15% last week, 8% this week. Rakdos Prowess, 11 last week, 13 this week, roughly about the same. Phoenix, a little bit of a downtick there. Boros Burn, massive downtick. Jund Sacrifice, a little bit of a downtick. Celestia Angels, nowhere to be found last week, 5% this week. Jund Creativity, basically nowhere to be found last week, 8% this week. So you'll notice these really big shifts and changes and trends in the Pioneer format. But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people are not playing it competitively right now, where there's not as much focus on trying to figure out what the best deck in the format is, and people are just kind of trying some stuff out, which I like. That is a good place to be. The challenges, for posterity's sake, there was 5. Azorius Control, 2 Jund Sacrifice, 1 Jund Creativity, and 1 Rakdos Demons. Now, as we take a look at this metagame, I got some really spicy ones, 3 for you today from the Pioneer Challenge top 32s. And also don't forget, Pioneer Masters coming to Arena, I believe December 10th, and I think I plan on releasing some content with Pioneer Masters, because the format looks, to be honest with you, just looks like fun. And I want to kind of dip my toes back into Pioneer, even if just for a day or two. Say what's up. Make sure that Pioneer knows that I'm still thinking about them. So again, a couple of decks here I want to show you. So first one is from Dookie Trousers MD in 25th place. This is Celestia Enchantments, where you're utilizing Calyx Guided by Fate to put counters on stuff. When an enchanted creature hits an opponent, you get to copy an enchantment. You can copy Overlords, which gets out of control with Calyx, as you can probably imagine. You have Jukai Naturalist to discount your spells. Enduring Innocence paired with stuff like Llanowar Elves and Elvish Mystic to draw a bunch of cards. Sheltered by Ghosts, just completely busted card. This is literally a custom card. Every single time I read Sheltered by Ghosts, it has a new ability, so card's great. And this kind of just looks like a standard deck that just has Jukai Naturalist and an extra elf in it. So, I mean, looks pretty cool. Maybe it'll be in the list to be played. Next up here from Carnage Cards ENT in 28th place. This is also a standard deck, but it's a standard deck with more elves. Although we're only playing 6, 2 Elvish Mystic and 4 Llanowar, which is a little strange. But if you guys remember a video I did a couple of weeks back with Wildleaf Legion standard, this is essentially what we were doing in Standard, where you're just trying to find all of the green and white gold creatures, right? You have Burrowguard Mentor, big trample, Dryad Militant, 1 mana 2/1, Fleece Mane Lion. You do get some upgrades from Standard to Pioneer here, namely Fleece Mane Lion and Voice of Resurgence. That's a huge one that I really wish we had in Standard. But one other thing you'll notice is that a lot of our creatures, at least the ones that attack profitably, are white. And that allows us to play 4 copies of Brave the Elements, which is a protection spell. It also helps you get through a bunch of big blockers if your opponent's playing demons or something and they got a couple of 6/6s in the way. You just Brave the Elements your team. A Johnny Caller for the Pride. Very good with specifically Burrowguard Mentor, because that thing gets really big, and with flying and double strike, you can kind of just kill your opponent in one shot, which is nice. Mana base, nothing too crazy, but yeah, I don't know. This looks like a very similar take to what we were doing in Standard, and I got to imagine the upgrades probably make it quite a bit better. Now, this is what you're all here for, because this is probably what my editor is going to put in the thumbnail. Tarka 711, huge shout out to Atarka. They are after my own heart, personally. Godpharaoh's Gift, and that's all you need to say. That's the whole title of the video, Godpharaoh's Gift. End it all right there. So Godpharaoh's Gift got a pretty cool upgrade from Foundations in the form of Kiora the Rising Tide, where Kiora sets up the Godpharaoh's Gift because notably it discards 2, right? Fear of Missing Out is good, where 2 mana 2/3 ETB discard draw, but it only puts one of the pieces in the graveyard, because in order to set up Godpharaoh's Gift, you kind of need to put the gift in the graveyard and a creature to get back, where say, for Imagine, turn 3 Kiora, discard gift plus creature, turn 4, refurbish the gift back the creature. You see where this is going. So the combination of Kiora and Philagi Archaeologist, which makes sense because it mills and finds refurbish, and then our big payoffs are Angel of Invention and Overlord of the Boiler Bilges. Fable the Mirrorbreaker appearing here, makes sense. Discard some cards. Discard Godpharaoh's Gift. Also, copying Angel of Invention sounds kind of sick. Just a lot to like about this deck, and when I do go back to some Pioneer content, this is one that I'm probably going to be starting with for sure. With Modern and Pioneer out of the way, we only have one format left. And you guessed it correctly, Standard is the last format we are going to be discussing. Now, I will say, this graph does not look very appealing, I guess is maybe the word, where there's a lot of mid-range, right? 21% Dimir, 19% Golgari. That makes up 40% of the format. Last week was about the same, 21-18, so that trend seems to be continuing. Now, I don't know what it is, but for some reason, when I've played on the Arena ladder, like Mythic ladder, there's not that many black mid-range decks. At least, that's how I personally feel. Let me know in the comments section down below if you have the same experience. So I don't know if this is just a Magic Online thing where people are just gravitating more towards these black mid-range decks, but in any case, there's a lot of them. Mono Red Aggro, hovering around the same 10%. Cruel Prowess took a huge dip, 10 down to 3. Teamer Prowess, a little bit of a dip there. 5-color Overlords, about the same. Mono White Tokens on the uptick a little bit, which makes sense given the 40% black mid-range metagame share. Jeskai Convoke about the same. Simic Terror, a little bit of a bump. Oculus bump. Boros Prowess, slight uptick. Again, some small changes on the outskirts, but for the most part, this is a chart that is dominated by black decks. But there's got to be some ways that we can beat those black decks, right? Before we go ahead and take a look at the decks from the weekend, just wanted to say there were 4 total challenges. So again, small sample size. So take the data that you're seeing here with a grain of salt. That 40% black mid-range share, it's only across 4 challenges, so the sample size is much smaller. But they were won by Golgari mid, Dimir mid, shocker I know, Boros Auras, and Teamer Prowess. Now, as far as how we are attacking these black mid-range decks, well, I found a couple here that just might do the trick. So the first one I have here is from Jesupinator in 23rd place. This is Gruul Ramp. Now, for people who have seen Gruul Ramp decks in Standard over the past 6, 7, 8 months, you might notice there is a very specific card that is absent from this list, and that is Smuggler's Surprise. When I first saw this list was a shocker to me. I was very surprised to see that you could build a ramp deck without that card. But then the more I thought about it, the more it just kind of made sense, where Okay, so with Llanowar Elves and Foundations, you're a little bit more reliant on smaller creatures to accelerate you, which makes you a little bit weaker against the cut down decks. And if they're cut downing your elves and you're not able to get up to the required mana for Smuggler's Surprise, they're going to be dead cards in your hand more often. You can cycle them for 3 mana, but that's not why you're putting Surprise in your deck in the first place. So I think the idea of just playing elves and a bunch of cheaper cards, right? 4 Screaming Nemesis, 2 Sentinel of the Nameless City, a pile of removal, 4 Bushwhack, 2 Vivian Reed at the top of the curve, 2 Valkavoss Onslaught, which is interesting because you can cast it for 3, you can cast it for 5. It's pretty flexible in that regard. And then at the very, very top of the curve, just only 2 Boiler Bilges. There's no 7s, no Vaultborns, no Italis, none of that stuff. We're just kind of playing, I guess the way that I look at this is green-red, the good cards. And I think it's a pretty good approach to the ramp decks, especially given how much black midrange there is. Next up, huge shout out to Ms. Lizzie. 4th place here has provided us with an awesome Collector's Cage decks. And I'm going to say this, spoiler alert, be on the lookout for some content with this deck because I played it for 4 hours on my stream yesterday. So surely there's going to be a video at some point. This deck is sick as hell. Okay, so a lot of people in my chat have been asking me if I tried Collector's Cage with Llanowar Elves because it is something that we tried in Pioneer, using Elf as a 1-power creature to help you have enough stuff to get Collector's Cage online. And it just so happens that there's enough stuff to do with it in Standard. So the big payoff here, what you're caging into is Overlord of the Mistmoors, which is perfect because when you hit it off of Cage, it is a 6/6 and 2/2/1 flyers. You can also just cast it for 4 mana to give you the bodies to enable Cage. So it's kind of just the perfect card for this deck. Then you also have stuff like Toby, which is a 1-power creature and a 4-power creature for 3 mana, 2 bodies, important for Cage. You have stuff like Paw Patch Recruit, which is 3 mana, 2 bodies, 1 with 2 power, 1 with 1 power. You have Enduring Innocence, which is kind of your big card advantage engine, where you can actually grind with the Golgari decks, even as they are trading up the curve 1-for-1 with your creatures. As long as all of those creatures are replacing themselves, then you don't really care that much. And then Sheltered by Ghosts as well. Virtue, another reasonable payoff to hit off of Cage, because if you cage into it, you can just cast the 5-mana half, which is kind of cool. So yeah, like I said, be on the lookout for some content with this one. It's really sick. Next up, we have Sandile in 31st place. Just wanted to highlight some Rakdos Reanimator because this is a version that I've seen pop up every now and again, but I haven't had the opportunity to try it myself. And I don't know what it was about this, like these numbers and this version specifically, but it just looks clean. The notable differences between this version and other Reanimator decks I've seen before is, first and foremost, Highway Robbery, which I think is kind of genius, where if you don't already have a thing to discard in your hand, you can plot the robbery on turn 2 and give yourself 1 or 2 more shots to try and find it. Example, say you have a hand that has Highway Robbery, nothing else to do on turn 2, but you don't have a Valkavoth in your hand, you can plot it, and then you give yourself 2 more turns to, say on turn 4, you haven't unplotted it yet, you draw the Valkavoth, then you can go Robbery, discard Valkavoth, go from there. The other cool thing that I really like about this list is Trumpeting Carnosaur, because it just curves so naturally with Zombify. You go turn 3, channel the Carnosaur, turn 4, Zombify, bring back Carnosaur. So nothing too groundbreaking here, but I just wanted to highlight this deck specifically just for those 2 cards. Now remember that thing I said about Smuggler's Surprise earlier? Yo-Man said, hold my beer, and Yo-Man has showed up with 4 Smuggler's Surprise. This is an interesting take on the ramp deck, where we are pairing it with white instead of green for, you guessed it, Overlord of the Mistmoors, because all the Overlords are busted, and they just make sense to play in a ramp deck. Now, what else does white give you? One other very, very important card. So you get a decent removal spell upgrade with Get Lost compared to the damage-based removal like Torch and Scorching Dragonfire and stuff. So Get Lost, a more versatile answer, but I think more importantly, Beza. There's so much red going around, especially on, at least in my experience, on Arena. So I think having the opportunity to play Beza in a deck that doesn't have a ton of creatures early on does make a lot of sense. You'll also notice the absence of Up the Beanstalk, which is a little shocking, but Yo-Man has cut a good amount of the 5s. We do still have 12 here, so I wouldn't hate to see some Beanstalks, but interesting to see that card removed from this deck. But yeah, just a slightly different take on the ramp deck with those smuggler surprises. I want to give a quick shout out to Waldo in 30th place. We found him. We found Waldo. We don't need to look for him anymore. This is, I don't know what to call this. Blue-white flash? Blue-white aggro? Because this has a lot of similar elements to the glyph deck. But if you look in the enchantment section, where'd the glyphs go? You're still playing Wardens, you're still playing Sirens, you're still playing Novices, Mockingbirds, you still have that core of cards, Regal Bunnicorn as well, but no artifact stuff, no Seraph, no Glyph, and really just kind of like, again, similar, going back to the red-green deck that we saw earlier, playing the good cards, right? Enduring Curiosity, Flood Pit's Drowner, Fairy Mastermind, so you have like that early core, which is so powerful with Warden, where it's like Warden, Siren, Inspector, but then you just have the good cards as you go up the top of the curve. Still playing Sheltered because that card is broken, but yeah, interesting take on the blue-white deck. I'm not really sure exactly what to call it, and I may have to give this one a try just to see how different it plays from the glyph deck, but cool take on it. And then last, but certainly not least, Hamuda. This is a first place, a rare first place showcase of a deck tech here. I've seen plenty of Borosaurus decks, right? We have Shard Mage's Rescue, Sheltered by Ghost, the Mice package with Optimistic Scavenger. The one card that I have not seen people playing with, and the reason I wanted to highlight this deck, is Spellbook Vendor. And I think this card's kind of sick, where it's a 2-mana 2/2 Vigilance, and then at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can pay a colorless to make a Sorcerer roll token attached to target creature you control. What's nice about that is it gives you a way to sort of buff creatures every turn, but also more importantly, it gives you a way to trigger Scavenger every single turn without having to draw more auras. So I thought that was kind of cool, and it can also trigger stuff like Emberheart Challenger and Heartfire Hero. So just wanted to highlight that for that specific interaction, because I haven't seen people play with Spellbook Vendor before, but now that we've seen Hamuda win with it, maybe more people will follow suit. Alrighty, folks, that is going to do it for another episode of Watching the Meta. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the content. Let me know in the comment section down below what you thought. And until next week, adios.